cannot cope with it, and he has reluctantly but inevitably given up. Against this particular point of view, of course, comes our Buddhist philosophy, which warns the individual again and again that both himself and his concept of the universe both arise only in his own attitudes, that he actually knows nothing about qualities of life essentially different from his own. The only possible way, therefore, in which he can know something that he does not know is to become something that at present he is not. The only way in which you can increase insight is to improve character. This was a mystical religious axiom of the ages. It is found in every religious book. It is found in every great teacher's recommendations to disciples, that the beginning of wisdom for man is to correct his own faults, purify his own life, subdue his own unreasonable attitudes, and escape from the dominating conviction that he must be right. Until something happens to this pattern, there will be no answers to the great questions, and the terms God and man must still stand in contrast to each other. In the Vedanta system, there is no such contrast. God and man are aspects of one reality. Man is a manifestation of the eternal energy of God. Man's consciousness is an extension of God consciousness. The individual within himself is identical with divinity, and the difference lies only in the degree of the realization of this fact. Between man as man and man as divinity looms the menacing shadow of man's own humanity, by which he is isolated from his divinity. To the degree, therefore, that man is bound to the earth, he is an animal. To the degree that he is satisfied to live an animal existence, he is merely a biped without feathers, as Plato called him. As long as the human being does not excel other creatures around him in the unfolding of character, he is not greater than those other creatures. This excellence must not be merely an exaggeration of an animal proclivity. Thus we find ants that build cities, and great cones that rise in the desert. To an ant, these cones are skyscrapers. They are many, many times the height of the ant. And if we were to compare, we would realize why people standing on the top of the Empire State Building and looking down say that people below look like ants. It is a matter of relativity in this particular degree. But you can never build a building that will cause you to break basic partnership with an ant community. You can never create a social system by which you will escape all of the implications of the life of the bee. You will never be able to develop the skills and speeds which will absolutely differentiate you from the bird, the insect, the underwater creature. Everywhere in nature we see various superlatives: strength, cunning, sense. Man, isolated in a forest, is hopelessly lost. A bird, carried hundreds of miles from its home, will unerringly return there. Dogs that have been taken away from families or have been left behind by families have traveled hundreds of miles over unknown terrain and gone home. Man cannot do this. He is hopelessly outmaneuvered in instincts and intuitions by creatures that he has not very much respect for. Therefore, what is it by which man is uniquely entitled to consider himself capable of discovering or experiencing truth? First of all, it is because man, perhaps, we are not sure, but we think it possible, is the only creature that can estimate itself. It is the only creature capable of turning into itself and asking the question, who am I? This is the beginning of man's great journey, for his entire progress has been a desperate searching after elusive answers. In the Eastern philosophy, there is in man a principle which is called the Atman. This is one with the infinite life, consciousness, love, truth, wisdom of space. The Atman is everywhere. It is the God of things and the God in things. It extends throughout infinity. It is able to fill spaces where even the lights of cosmic suns cannot reach. There is no conceivable boundary to it. And no matter how far we travel into infinity, we can never hope to reach the edge of the Atman. This is the all-pervading, and it is the one source of what we may term existence. It is the ever-fruitful. It is what the Egyptians called the seminal power of space, filled with seed. And these seed itself, of its own nature and of its own kind. Creation is a great field in which these tiny seeds fall into the dark earth of matter and grow up again and are fruitful and replenish the earth. Everything is Atman. Everything is life. And this Atman has the only ultimate perfection we can conceive of. We do not know whether it is conscious or not, but we know that consciousness arises in it. We do not know whether it thinks or not, but it can bestow thought. We are not concerned too much whether it moves or not, because it is the source of motion. We are not sure whether it is light or darkness, but we know that the darkness of it is full of light. We know that it is infinite life, infinitely manifesting. We know that it creates, preserves, and finally absorbs all things into itself. It fashions and nourishes that which it fashions. It is being and food and place and time. It is impossible for us in this stage of our evolution to experience the actual, essential life of the Atman. We cannot know all that it is, because the only conceivable thing that can know all is the Atman itself. Whether this Atman knows all else but itself, or knows only itself, or has no knowledge of either, or knows both, these questions are unanswerable by man. But the hypothesis or the concept of the Atman alone meets, to the Vedantic thinker, the absolute minimum requirement of what it is that is at the root of existence. Nothing less can explain all things. And when you have to leave some things out of an explanation, it also means that you must leave some men out of redemption. The next thing, then, is that this Atman, in some form, pervades all life and is the life in life. That those creatures that do not know this are still pervaded by it, so that everything that exists is of one essential quality, differing in degrees of manifestation, but identical in eternal substance. To hold this thought, then, as the Swami Vivekananda points out, is to immediately accept the ethical responsibility of the ultimate and inevitable brotherhood of all that lives. All things which arise from the same parental cause must be considered brothers. Furthermore, in this cause there is no essential demarcation between forms of life. Demarcation is created by body, not in life itself. We have no proof, therefore, in the Vedantic thinking, that the Atman in one person is separate from the Atman in another. To assume such separateness is also to assume that every unit of life in deity is separate. And this becomes inconceivable, inasmuch as the very power of deity implies unity, implies oneness. We cannot assume of deity as an infinite chaos. We must assume it as an infinite cosmos. And to do this, we must bind all the parts together by some binding of some kind, unity. If it should occur, therefore, that we are substantially one creature, then we can refer to mankind as a being containing many parts, but not divided, even as our human body is composed of an infinite diversity of living creatures, bound together by the overconsciousness which we call ourselves. But this bond is not conscious in us. It is made possible by autonomic processes, by procedures within our own structure which we are not even aware take place. So in the Vedanta theory, there is one humanity, made up of races, made up of social branches, divided into various levels of development, but one. By the same concept, there is one animal creation, of which man is technically a part, bound to it by body, but released from it by the power of individual creative thought. All animals, therefore, must properly be regarded as embodiments of Atman. They, too, have this reality in them. For if it was not there, they could not exist. They could not live. They could not pass through the various simple cycles of existence which distinguish them. They could not be fruitful. They could not have regard for their young. They could not choose their mates. And in the end, they could not creep away and experience death. They have to be part of this one life. This means that in the last analysis, the concept of brotherhood must be extended to all these creatures. St. Francis de Assisi recognized this and with the deepest mystical insight referred to his brother the birds and his sisters the flowers. They are one life. And the realization of this could be a tremendous civilizing force if we really know what it means. We have to go further. Minerals. We have to go into the insect kingdoms. We have to go everywhere. For if a thing is, it can only exist in a state of being because eternal being sustains it, exists in it, supports it, integrates it, causes its masses to be held together, and prevents its parts from flying into oblivion. So we live in a universe, as the Swami Vivekananda pointed out, in which there is only one life, the unity of which is not experienced by most persons. Yet this unity is that which makes, in the last analysis, God and man one. And even still further, performs the ultimate attainment, which is in honor of deity, namely, that in the end, man returns to and becomes one with God, or the Atman. Thus, man is a temporary condition, a stage or step in an eternal program of growth. We cannot properly, therefore, compare God and man. For in one way of looking at it, man is a degree of the waking up of God. And from another way of looking at it, God is a degree of asleepness locked in corporeal form. We have no contrast here any more than we will later find that we have a vital contrast in good and evil. We have only conditions of being. Now, when the average person thinks of God, he does not think of being, as we may term it philosophically. He thinks of a very personal relationship with space. He feels that it is inhabited by powers bent upon his redemption, and that in some mysterious way he can know the consolation of a personal contact with a personal divinity. Here again, your Eastern philosopher points out that the deeper view is not a loss but a gain. What do we actually know of the consolation of the presence of God? What do we know of what Brother Lawrence called the practice of the presence of God? To us, we have only our own interpretation of deity as something that exists to come at our summons to bind up the wounds created by our own mistakes. The Easterner doesn't think of it this way, but he points out that this vastness, which might be called the Atman, has another dimension. For after all, it is all, and all must be the greatest and the smallest, the most remote and the most immediate. It must not only be everywhere, it must be here. Therefore, the omnipresent, omniscient deity is not to be regarded as something of an attenuated nature resembling cosmic space or vacuum. It is not a spirit hidden in a void or something that has to be distilled out of atmosphere. This spirit is actually closer to us than any other part of our own natures, because it is the core. We can never have anything closer to us than our own center. But when we are not in the center seems distant. Again, it is a matter of our own orientation. Consequently, mysticism has never resulted in the strange, cold, detached attitude towards spiritual values that sometimes seem to develop in people as the result of misinterpretation. To St. Francis, this omnipresent power was so close, so intimate, that he could confide in it completely. It knew every part of him. It knew his sorrows. It knew his hopes, his weaknesses. It knew his failings, and by some strange mercifulness within itself, it forgave him. He had no way of really understanding in philosophic terms. It was not his way of life. But he did intuitively sense this tremendous fact that the Atman knows all, that there is only one part of ourselves that can understand us, and that is this core of life. For in this core of life are the laws of our own existence. Here our own being is established. Here every motive, every thought, every emotion, every reflex is in some way known and comprehended. Not perhaps intellectually, as we think of things, but by the mysterious alchemy of identity. This thing which is at the source of us, being all of us, has the power to understand every part of us. It is this understanding which in some way becomes the intuitive guidance, the basis of perhaps our own extrasensory perception. Certainly it is Emerson's oversoul and the anthropos of the Alexandrian gnosis. It is the man above the man. It is this power which is aware of the man, though the man is not aware either of the power or of himself. Here we come to another very practical phase of the matter, and that is the contribution that has been made to this theme by Zen and other Buddhistic systems. The Atman is divided from us by a mysterious machinery of thoughts, attitudes, perceptions, reflections, and what are called the aggregates or skandhas. These represent the machine, the carefully built-up instrument which was originally designed to help man to know himself. But man, in a moment of extraordinary craftiness, dedicated this machine to the advancement of his own purposes, not the purposes for which the machine was intended. Thus man gained all other things and lost contact with his own nature. This instrument can certainly make him rich, because it will give him the skills to create wealth. It can give him the abilities to gratify every reasonable and many unreasonable demands. But the more industriously it is used to advance his material state, the less it is available for its original purpose. So in Zen and Buddhism generally, the point remains that it is this machine that is forever clouding and confusing the issues of life. Man conceals reality by acting contrary to it. First of all, reality is universal. A person, highly personal, cannot experience it, because the personal can never experience that which is superior to itself. The more personal we become, therefore, the more we personalize God and the universe, and set ourselves up into a very smug little system which is slightly better than idolatry, if any better at all. Actually, therefore, that which performs any destructive action must set up obscuration within its own nature. Anything which holds destructive attitudes, which seeks to revenge itself, which strikes back against what it regards to be the injustice of others, anything that does this strengthens this pattern of personal selfhood. We are hurt because we are offended, and therefore we defend the ego and sacrifice the God. We are ambitious. We are not so much desirous of a good place in the world to come. We want immediate satisfaction. So we sacrifice eternity to a career within a few years of time. We are jealous. Atman is not jealous. But jealousy arises as a result of the conflict of inconsistent patterns within man. A good example of this is to answer a basic question. If Atman is not jealous, how can jealousy exist? All of these faults are secondary patterns, and Kepler tells us the whole story in connection with astronomy. In the development of his astrological speculations, Kepler says very simply, there is no such a thing as a bad planet. There is no such a thing, actually, as a malefic principle in astrology. Yet things moving in their proper orbits come into different relationships with each other. Therefore, the planets, forming different mechanical, mathematical, chemical patterns, become like elements combined in retorts. From their temporary combinations, new secondary substances are created. From the various combinations of eternal principles, non-eternal patterns come into existence. Thus came sin and death into the world. They are not primaries. They are the result of various levels of ignorance locked in conflict with each other. And wisdom is the medicine that remedies them all. By this very same principle, therefore, the so-called difficulties which arise in temperaments, which cause us to take various wrong courses of action, all arise from a combination of ignorance and selfness or egotism. These are the causes of trouble. Egotism is the belief that the individual is uniquely divine in the midst of a universe in which there is only one God. Selfishness is the belief that good can come to an individual in a universe in which nature bestows good upon all. And in the efforts that we make to steal good from each other, we make ourselves incapable of experiencing good ourselves. So in the Zen and Buddhist concept, the answer lies in the gradual sublimation of the individual, and his pattern is derived from the nature of the infinite being that he venerates. He would grow, therefore, legitimately by becoming like God. Diogenes once thought this through rather carefully among the Greeks. And having considered the matter carefully as he was walking along the road, he suddenly said to himself, God does not need a staff to lean on. I lean on a staff. This proves that I am not God, because I am dependent. The only way I can become a little more godlike is to throw away the staff. So he did, and hobbled along the road, perhaps less comfortably, but free from one of the crutches of human weakness. It was a symbolical episode, but it points out the principle. Man, in order to achieve the state of Atman, must dispense with those things which are non-Atman, upon which his fascination may be centered, to the denial of his eternal birthright. Now, no one suggests that the individual throw away his staff or his dentures. This is not the consideration. The consideration is in consciousness. The individual must gradually attempt to be like the consciousness that he worships. The Master Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. If we love God, we must live according to the life of God, insofar as this is possible. This was the mystic speculation of Saint Buenaventura and Santa Teresa. It was the effort to live like the truth which we regard as supreme. We know this truth is everywhere, and that in this truth no living thing is left out. Therefore, in our consciousness, though we cannot be everywhere, we can still include all things in our sense of righteousness. We can recognize the unity of life and try to live according to it, remembering always that to the degree that we offend the least of living things, we offend our Father which is in heaven. This leads to the harmless life. And Atman, deity, is the harmless being, where there can be no harm in its nature. We look to deity forever for understanding. The deity will excuse our faults and forgive our limitations. And we have infinite faith that this power, whatever it may be, in its justice, will see that no evil befalls us, whether we understand or not. Therefore, as we ask forgiveness, we must practice the concept of the universal benevolence of life that holds no grudge for any reason against anything. To the degree that we can approach this, we approach reality. We actually believe also that deity is eternally concerned with the good of its creation. Therefore, we should be eternally concerned with the well-being of each other. We should guard the natural resources of the earth. We should protect and use wisely everything that we have, because in the great universal power, all things are used with perfect wisdom. Little by little, we can exemplify to some degree these attributes which we regard to be the Atman, at the source of existence and in the heart of ourselves. Buddhism, Vedanta, Yoga, Christian mysticism, the doctrines of the Sufi, and even the witch medicine doctors of our American Indian tribes all held this point in common, that to the degree that we can unfold our own existence, quietly, wisely, lovingly, become aware of universal good, to that degree this Atman, or power within ourselves, comes into manifestation in us. It comes into manifestation when we as persons become like it as principle. It can never manifest in a condition contrary to honor, contrary to ethics, contrary to love, friendship, and peace. Now, this may appear to work a great hardship upon many people who feel that this would lead to very serious misunderstanding. Other people would not believe them to be strong, brave, courageous, self-controlled individuals. They would come to be regarded as weaklings, as failures, as non-entities. Well, let's think it through for a moment. Millions of people today do not believe that God exists. This must be most humiliating to deity, who probably neither knows nor cares. We have given deity a very bad time since the beginning. And if in our ignorance we have perverted truth from the dawn of time, and we try to live truth in our own lives today, others are going to think we are fools. But the simple matter remains, who cares? If we please these other people, we shall be in the same misery they are in. If we keep faith with reality, we will be understood by all who understand the facts. And that is what is really important. So if we must decide whether we find it advantageous to cultivate inner security, we are probably not ready for it. But if we ever want to solve the questions, and this goes for the laboratory worker, the scientist, the educator, the religionist, whoever it may be, if we want to answer the great questions, we must remember the thoughtful words of Omar Khayyam. For it is from our own base metals that must be filed the key that will unlock the door of the dervish flouts without. If it is to be done at all, it is to be an experience of the revelation of reality from within. And mystics and saints and sages of all nations, the great teachers of East and West, have described this journey in. This journey which St. John of the Cross describes as the dark night of the soul. The individual seeking reality. And finally discovering the supreme reward for the quest. That is, the experience of identity between man and God. And we have no longer these two contrasting terms. We have the Son who has returned to his Father's house. For him the banquet is spread. And in this reunion, we for the first time become capable of experiencing the love of God. For love of God must arise from love for God. The love for truth must lead us to truth. The love of eternity must make us citizens of eternity. So in the achievement of our own inner consciousness, illumination, samadhi, what the Buddhists may call the Mahaparinirvana, in this achievement, man suddenly becomes one with the Atman, becomes one with the infinite for which there is no second, experiences the final assurance that the divine plan is immutable and everlasting. Until then, he can only believe. But sometime each one of us will transform or transmute believing into the actual experience of the thing believed. This is the only way in which certainties can come to man. Until then, he must be guided by his faith, inspired by the noble words of his sages and saviors, and impelled a little at a time by his own conscience to the refinement and redemption of his own character. Well, time is up, folks, so I guess that's it for this evening.